redistribution, okay? Understood as demos, the people as demos. Populism could be a fight for democratic or political redistribution of power. But understood, for example, as ethnos, populism could be racism, for example. Yeah, so it depends. And the other thing is that it's hard to say whether something is or is not populism, but it's more like a grade thing. So it has populist tendencies, or it uses populist rhetorics more than a specific either or, yes or no. Okay. And we found that approach useful as an analytical approach. And basically what we found, we explored where does Christianity intersect with populism in a Norwegian context. And not surprisingly, we found some instances of that in the asylum, refugee, immigration discourse, of course, but also in the protection of cultural heritage. Yeah, maybe also in the climate discourse, which Andreas looked at, where the, of course, the religious element in that would be the apocalyptic element. So which means also that religion or Christianity can be sort of understood as religious symbols, like the apocalypse, or more of a religious, or as a cultural phenomenon, cultural identity, but also religious in terms of religious teaching. That's I will save that for later.
Yes. So one of the things we found in this book is that when religion occurs in populism, religious symbols, they are typically used as cultural identity markers. And here our findings is in continuity with much other research on populism and religion, such as in this book, Saving the People, where Marzocchi, McDonnell, and Roy argue that this kind of use of religious symbols must be understood in light of the cultural battle that populists claim that is going on. So, like, for instance, for right-wing populists, the aim is typically to preserve, but also to promote Western culture, and then also the Christian heritage, which is defined as part and important for the Western culture. And then especially from the threat of the Muslim immigrations, who are constructed as the threatening other, like when we look at it with Brubaker's theoretical lens. One example of such use of religious symbols on a political level is when Markus Söder, the minister president of Bavaria in Germany, in 2018 introduced a law that said that in the entrance of all public buildings, there should be a cross hanging on the wall, very visible. And the law came in the wake of the so-called refugees crisis. And he justified the law by saying that the cross symbolizes Western and Bavarian identity. In my chapter in this book, I look at discussions about the cross in quite another context. Some of you might remember the so-called cross controversy in 2013 here in Norway, when a newsreader at NRK Sørlandet, the Norwegian state channel, she was banned from wearing a cross pendant on air. And this decision made by the leadership of NRK caused a lot of complaints. It actually provoked a storm of complaints. For instance, there's a Facebook group called Yes to Wear the Cross Whenever and Wherever I Want. And the Facebook group got more than 100,000 likes, which was a lot at that time. And Mona Abdel Fadil, she has analyzed the discussion and the debate in this Facebook group with regards mainly to dynamics in medialized conflicts around religion. Further, 188 complaints letters were sent to NRK. These letters, and very briefly, what I find, because it is not politicians who have been writing these letters, I think, I don't know, they were analyzed when anonymized when I got them, but what I find is still that in the main group of letters, in the majority of the letters, you can actually trace a populist rhetoric in how the cross is interpreted. The cross is mainly interpreted as a cultural national identity symbol. And it is claimed that the cross symbolizes the Norwegian culture, and this is then explained as in opposition to the threatening of the Muslim as the other, as a threatening other. And also in opposition to NRK's leadership, who they claim failed to protect the Norwegian cultural heritage. So, but interestingly, this populist rhetoric you don't find in a smaller group of the letters, and that is the letters that interpret the cross as a symbol of personal faith. So that is actually a difference. And this, and in those letters, you don't find Muslims described as the threatening other. And this brings us over to a further conclusion, and that is, which we see more generally in the book, and that is when Christianity and populism meet, you can find kind of a battle about religious symbols, like who owns the religious symbols and who owns Christianity. Is it those who argue that they symbolizes Western culture, or is it those who go regularly to church? Is it populist right-wing politicians who wear the cross and hold up the Bible? Or is it church leaders who preach solidarity and argue for the value of a life-view open society? Of course, the picture is more nuanced than this, and you also find in some contexts right-wing populist tendencies in churches. But still, as Lars Iversen asked in his chapter, and as Hanna Strømmen and Rudi Schmiedel asked in this, I could say that that expression to that they project Christianity. Go over to you, can something.
How much?
A couple of minutes.
A couple of minutes. Okay. Briefly say the most interesting findings we did, according to my, what I thought was interesting. The first thing I thought was interesting was that in the Norwegian established political discourse, there is kind of less Christian populism than in other countries. So due to the very secularized environment in Norway, I think we have Christianity has not that strong appeal, also not as a cultural phenomenon than, for example, Eastern. So Kristin referred to this so-called refugee crisis in 2015. So when we saw that politicians in the eastern part of Europe, in Slovenia, Poland, Slovakia, Serbia, they explicitly said, we don't want any Muslim that Christianity, or at least religion, in their populist rhetoric. In Norway, right-wing party who not of welcoming too many of those immigrants. They had a economical bearable in terms of that many. Okay, so that's an interesting. Fremskrittspartiet didn't use the Christian symbols. Section of the Norwegian people, basically. So that is an interesting finding, and the other interesting finding, I think, was we also saw populistic rhetorics, religious communities, so even in Church of Norway, and I discourse on Åpen Folkekirkes fight with they had to mobilize the people of God, establishment of the church of those days, in to political change, because the people of God was well represented. Of course, you find that in, I think, different religious movements. I mean, look at Luther, and used harsh populist rhetoric against the Pope, the Antichrist of that time. So in religious reform movements, you would also find a mobilizing, an antagonistic mobilizing of the people of God in terms of representation and church doctrine, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I'm
Thank you
fine.
so much.